Rachel Maddow thought she could destroy Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle with leaked, classified documents and accusations of incompetence on live television. What happened next triggered a federal investigation that ended Maddow's career and created the biggest scandal in MSNBC history. The MSNBC studios in Rockefeller Center buzzed with unusual intensity that Wednesday evening in November, as producers prepared for what they'd internally called the interview that changes everything. Rachel Maddow sat behind her familiar desk, surrounded by stacks of documents and manila folders that her research team had been compiling for weeks. Tonight's guest was Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle, and Maddow had prepared what she believed would be a career-ending exposé of corruption and incompetence at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Director Cheadle appeared via satellite from her office in Washington, wearing her standard dark suit and carrying herself with the composed professionalism of someone who'd spent 28 years protecting the most powerful people in the world. She'd agreed to the interview expecting a routine discussion about Secret Service protocols and budget requests, unaware that Maddow had spent months coordinating with Democratic operatives and anti-Trump organizations to orchestrate what amounted to a televised character assassination. Maddow had obtained what she believed was a treasure trove of leaked documents, internal Secret Service communications, budget allocations, and operational reports that she was convinced would prove Cheadle was running a politicized agency that favored Republican officials while neglecting threats against Democrats. Her plan was simple: ambush Cheadle, with the leaked materials force her into defensive responses, and create a scandal that would demand her resignation. As the cameras rolled and the familiar MSNBC graphics filled the screen, Maddow launched into what she thought would be a systematic destruction of the Secret Service's credibility. Good evening, I'm Rachel Maddow, and tonight we have an exclusive investigation into what may be the most serious breach of federal law enforcement integrity in decades. Her voice carried the breathless urgency that had made her a liberal media icon. We're joined by Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle, whose agency is facing explosive allegations of political bias, security failures, and potential criminal misconduct. Maddow held up a thick folder of documents. Director Cheadle weighs on I have in my possession internal Secret Service communications that suggest your agency has been making security decisions based on political considerations rather than actual threat assessments. How do you respond to evidence that you've been running a partisan operation? It was classic Maddow. Lead with inflammatory accusations, wave around official-looking documents, and put the guest immediately on the defensive with loaded questions that assume guilt. But Cheadle had been expecting this approach. Her decades of experience in federal law enforcement had taught her to recognize ambush tactics, and she'd spent the past week preparing for exactly this kind of attack. Rachel, I appreciate you having me on, though I have to say your characterization of the Secret Service as a partisan operation is both false and deeply concerning. Cheadle replied, her voice calm and measured despite the aggressive opening. Before we continue, I need to ask, are you planning to discuss specific operational details or classified information during this interview? Because if so, I need to inform you of the legal implications of broadcasting such material. Maddow's confident expression flickered for just a moment. She hadn't expected Cheadle to immediately raise questions about the legality of the documents she'd obtained. Director, I'm a journalist reporting on matters of public interest, Maddow said, trying to regain momentum. The American people have a right to know if their Secret Service is being weaponized for political purposes. She pulled out a document from her folder. This internal memo dated 3 months ago shows that your agency allocated significantly more resources to protecting Republican officials than Democratic ones. How do you explain this clear evidence of political bias? Cheadle looked at the document Maddow was holding up, then reached into her own briefcase and pulled out an official folder marked with federal classification stamps. Rachel, I can see you're reading from what appears to be a classified operational assessment. Cheadle said, her tone becoming more serious. Before you continue, I need to inform you that broadcasting classified Secret Service documents on television is a federal crime under the Espionage Act. She opened her folder. But since you've raised questions about resource allocation, let me provide you with accurate declassified information that I'm authorized to share. Maddow tried to interrupt, but Cheadle continued with the authority of someone who'd briefed presidents and congressional committees. Under my leadership, the Secret Service has actually increased protection for Democratic officials by 40%. We've expanded the protective detail for the vice president increased security for Democratic congressional leadership, and enhanced threat assessment protocols for all protectees, regardless of party affiliation. She pulled out a chart. These are the actual budget allocations and personnel assignments declassified specifically for this interview. They show that we allocate resources based on threat assessments, not political considerations. Maddow was starting to look uncomfortable, realizing that her carefully planned ambush was being systematically dismantled by someone who'd come prepared with actual facts. But Director, what about the security failures? Maddow pressed, pulling out another document. This report details multiple breaches and lapses in judgment that put protectees at risk. Cheadle studied the document. Maddow was holding, her expression growing more serious. Rachel, that document you're displaying contains operational details about ongoing security protocols. You're broadcasting information that could be used by potential threats to harm the people we protect. She leaned forward toward the camera. I need to ask you directly. Where did you obtain these classified materials? Because what you're doing right now is not journalism. It's a potential national security violation. Maddow tried to deflect. My sources are protected under journalist privilege. There is no journalist privilege when it comes to classified national security information. Cheadle interrupted, her voice taking on the authoritative tone of a federal law enforcement official. The documents you're displaying contain operational details that are classified for the protection of current and former government officials. She pulled out her phone. I'm required by federal law to report the unauthorized disclosure of classified information to the appropriate authorities. The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras. Maddow realized that her ambush interview had just turned into a federal investigation with her as the target. Director, I think you're overreacting to standard journalistic practices, Maddow began weakly. Standard journalistic practices don't include broadcasting classified security protocols on live television, Cheadle replied. What you've done in the past 10 minutes is potentially compromised ongoing protective operations and violated multiple federal statutes. She looked directly into the camera. To be absolutely clear for your viewers, the documents Ms. Maddow has been displaying contain classified information about Secret Service operations. By broadcasting this material, she has potentially committed federal crimes under the Espionage Act and the Intelligence Identities Protection Act. Maddow was visibly panicking now, realizing that her career-making interview had become a career-ending disaster. But these documents show evidence of wrongdoing, she protested. No, they don't, Cheadle replied firmly. They show routine operational assessments that you've mischaracterized and taken out of context. But more importantly, they show classified information that you've illegally obtained and broadcast. She closed her folder. Rachel, I came here expecting a professional discussion about Secret Service operations. Instead, you've ambushed me with stolen classified documents and false accusations. This interview is over, and I'm required to report this incident to the FBI. Cheadle began removing her earpiece. To your viewers, what you've witnessed tonight is not journalism. It's the illegal broadcast of classified national security information. The Secret Service takes the protection of our protectees seriously, and we will pursue all legal remedies against anyone who compromises their safety. The satellite feed cut out, leaving Maddow sitting alone at her desk, surrounded by the classified documents that had just destroyed her career. The response was immediate and catastrophic. Within an hour, the FBI had opened a formal investigation into Maddow's possession and broadcast of classified materials. The Department of Justice issued a statement confirming that broadcasting classified Secret Service documents was a federal crime punishable by up to 10 years in prison. But the legal consequences were just the beginning. The journalism community was split between those who defended Maddow's right to report on government misconduct and those who condemned her for recklessly broadcasting classified information that could endanger protected officials. The Secret Service released a detailed statement explaining that the documents Maddow had displayed contained operational security protocols that could be used by potential threats to harm current and former government officials. They confirmed that several ongoing protective operations had to be modified as a result of the unauthorized disclosure. MSNBC found itself in the unprecedented position of having their star host under federal investigation for crimes committed during a live broadcast. Advertisers began pulling their sponsorships, worried about being associated with a network that had aired classified information. Legal experts warned that the network itself could face criminal liability for broadcasting the materials. The breaking point came when federal prosecutors obtained a search warrant for Maddow's offices and seized her computers, phones, and files as part of the criminal investigation. The image of FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence out of MSNBC's headquarters became a symbol of how completely Maddow's ambush had backfired. 3 days after the disastrous interview, MSNBC announced that Maddow would be taking an indefinite leave of absence while the legal issues were resolved. Industry insiders knew what that meant. Her career at the network was over, and she was facing potential federal prison time. The scandal deepened when investigators discovered that Maddow had been working with a network of Democratic operatives and former intelligence officials to obtain the classified documents. Several of her sources were arrested and charged with espionage-related crimes, creating the biggest intelligence leak scandal since Edward Snowden. Director Cheadle, meanwhile, was praised across the political spectrum for her professional handling of what could have been a national security disaster. Her calm, authoritative response to Maddow's ambush became a textbook example of how law enforcement officials should handle media attacks. In congressional testimony following the incident, Cheadle explained how Maddow's broadcast had forced the Secret Service to modify multiple ongoing protective operations, potentially putting protectees at risk. She emphasized that while the agency supported press freedom, there were legal and ethical boundaries that couldn't be crossed when it came to national security information. 6 months later, Maddow pled guilty to federal charges related to the unauthorized disclosure of classified information. She received a suspended sentence in community service, but her media career was permanently destroyed. The woman who'd built her reputation on exposing government misconduct had become the subject of the biggest government misconduct case in cable news history. In her first interview after Maddow's guilty plea, Cheadle was asked about the incident that had ended a prominent journalist's career. "I took no pleasure in what happened to Ms. Maddow," Cheadle said, "but when someone broadcasts classified information that could endanger the people we're sworn to protect, we have to take action regardless of their profession or political views." She continued, "The Secret Service doesn't care about partisan politics. We care about keeping people safe. When someone compromises that mission for ratings or political gain, there have to be consequences." The interviewer asked if she felt the incident had damaged press freedom. "Press freedom is essential to democracy," Cheadle replied, "but it doesn't include the right to broadcast classified national security information." What happened to Ms. Maddow wasn't about suppressing journalism. It was about enforcing the law. The lesson was clear. In an age of 24-hour news cycles and competitive journalism, the pursuit of scoops can't override basic legal and ethical boundaries. And when media figures confuse their platform with immunity from the law, the consequences can be swift and severe. Rachel Maddow thought she could destroy Kimberly Cheadle's career by ambushing her with leaked classified documents and accusations of political bias. Instead, she destroyed her own career by committing federal crimes on live television while being watched by someone who actually understood the law. Her downfall became a perfect example of what happens when journalistic ambition meets federal law enforcement. When someone who thinks they're above the law encounters someone whose job is to enforce it, and when the pursuit of political theater crosses the line into actual criminality. The irony was complete. Maddow, who'd built her career exposing government misconduct, had become the biggest example of media misconduct in cable news history, while Cheadle, who'd been targeted for destruction, emerged as a defender of both national security and the rule of law.